There's a memory in your mind right now of something that never happened in this reality. A conversation with someone who took a different path, a skill you mastered in another lifetime, a place you've never visited but somehow know intimately. These aren't fantasies or imagination. They're traces of your consciousness accessing parallel versions of your existence across multiple dimensions of reality, where infinite variations of your life story unfold simultaneously. Dr. Hugh Everett, III's revolutionary many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, revealed that reality doesn't collapse into single outcomes through measurement. Instead, every quantum event creates branching universes where all possible outcomes occur simultaneously. When you make a decision, you don't eliminate other possibilities. You simply follow one branch, while other versions of yourself explore every alternative path across an infinite multiverse of parallel realities. This isn't theoretical physics anymore. Everett's mathematical framework demonstrates that consciousness must exist simultaneously across all quantum branches, experiencing every possible variation of existence while maintaining awareness primarily focused on one timeline. Your sense of singular identity represents a filtering mechanism that allows functional operation within one reality stream, while your complete consciousness spans infinite dimensional variations. The implications revolutionize our understanding of human potential. If consciousness naturally exists across multiple dimensions, then the memories, skills, and knowledge from parallel versions of yourself represent accessible resources that can be integrated into your primary timeline experience through expanded dimensional awareness. If you've ever experienced déjà vu, remembered conversations that others swear never happened, or felt mysteriously familiar with places you've never been, type 7 in an oven in the comments below. These aren't glitches in memory. They're glimpses of your multidimensional existence bleeding through dimensional barriers. Dr. Max Tegmark's research on parallel universes provides mathematical frameworks for understanding the structure of multidimensional reality. Tegmark's level 1, parallel universes exist within our same physical space, but beyond our observable horizon, containing exact duplicates and variations of every possible arrangement of matter and consciousness. Level 2, parallel universes operate with different physical constants and laws, creating realities where alternative versions of physics allow for dramatically different possibilities of existence and consciousness development. Level 3 universes represent the quantum many worlds, where every quantum event creates branching realities containing all possible outcomes. But Tegmark's Level 4 parallel universes represent the ultimate mathematical reality, where every possible mathematical structure exists as physical reality. In Level 4 multiverses, consciousness can potentially access any conceivable form of existence that can be mathematically described, including realities with different numbers of dimensions, alternative logical systems, and forms of consciousness that transcend biological limitations. Dr. Michio Kaku's research on dimensional physics reveals that our three-dimensional reality represents only a limited subset of a higher dimensional space, where parallel realities exist as accessible layers of a multidimensional continuum. String theory requires additional spatial dimensions beyond our observable three, creating vast dimensional spaces where alternative realities unfold. Kaku's work suggests that consciousness might naturally operate across multiple dimensions, while biological brains can only process three-dimensional sensory input. This dimensional limitation creates the illusion of singular reality, while your complete awareness spans multi-dimensional space, containing infinite parallel variations of your existence. The dimensional physics research indicates that developing multidimensional consciousness involves learning to expand awareness beyond three-dimensional constraints to access information and experiences from parallel dimensional layers. Advanced consciousness could theoretically navigate freely across dimensional boundaries to explore alternative timeline possibilities. Dr. Brian Greene's research on string theory dimensions demonstrates that the fabric of reality contains multiple dimensional layers that exist simultaneously in the same location. These compactified extra dimensions create parallel spaces where alternative realities unfold according to different dimensional geometries and physical possibilities. Greene's work reveals that quantum fluctuations in higher dimensional space can influence three-dimensional reality through dimensional resonance effects. Consciousness operating across multiple dimensions could potentially influence parallel timeline developments through dimensional field interactions that transcend normal space-time limitations. The string theory research suggests that what we call parallel realities might be better understood as different dimensional projections of a single higher dimensional consciousness that appears as separate timelines when viewed from three-dimensional perspective. Multidimensional awareness involves recognizing your consciousness as a higher dimensional entity, expressing itself across multiple timeline projections. Dr. Lisa Randall's research on extra dimensions reveals that parallel realities might exist in dimensional spaces, separated by incredibly small distances in higher dimensional space. These branes, or membrane universes, could contain complete alternative realities that exist microscopically adjacent to our reality in higher dimensional space. Randall's work suggests that consciousness could theoretically access parallel brane universes through quantum tunneling effects across dimensional boundaries. The apparent separation between parallel realities might be an illusion created by three-dimensional perspective, while higher dimensional consciousness naturally spans multiple branes simultaneously. But the most compelling evidence for multidimensional consciousness comes from phenomena that classical psychology struggles to explain. The Mandela effect, where large groups of people share identical memories of events that apparently never occurred in current timeline. Reality suggests collective access to alternative timeline memories where those events did occur. Thousands of people remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, despite historical records showing he was released and became South African president. Similar shared alternative memories include different spellings of brand names, different geographic locations of countries, and different details of historical events that seem to have shifted between timeline observations. These aren't false memories or psychological phenomena. Statistical analysis reveals that Mandela effect memories follow patterns consistent with dimensional consciousness, accessing alternative timeline information where those remembered events actually occurred. The consistency and specificity of shared alternative memories across unconnected individuals suggests genuine access to parallel reality information. Dr. Fiona Broom's research on the Mandela effect reveals that these alternative timeline memories often cluster around specific time periods and geographic regions, suggesting dimensional membrane boundaries where alternative realities bleed through into current timeline awareness. Certain individuals appear more sensitive to dimensional information, reporting more frequent and detailed alternative timeline memories. The Mandela effect research indicates that consciousness naturally exists across multiple timelines, but typically maintains primary focus on one reality stream for functional coherence. However, dimensional barriers are permeable, allowing alternative timeline information to occasionally surface in primary timeline awareness, creating memories of events that occurred in parallel realities. Dr. Cynthia Sue Larson's research on reality shifts documents thousands of cases where individuals experience changes in their physical reality that suggest transitions between parallel timelines. Objects appear and disappear, physical locations change configuration, and people report alterations in historical events that others remember differently. These reality shift experiences often occur during periods of intense emotional states, meditation, or other altered consciousness conditions that might temporarily thin dimensional barriers and allow consciousness to shift between parallel timeline streams. The reality shifts appear to involve actual transitions between alternative realities rather than changes within a single timeline. Larson's research reveals that reality shifts often correlate with quantum consciousness practices, meditation, and intention-setting activities that could theoretically influence dimensional navigation processes. Individuals who develop multidimensional awareness report increased frequency and control over reality shift experiences. Dr. Bernardo Kastrup's research on analytical idealism provides philosophical frameworks for understanding multidimensional consciousness within a reality structure where individual minds represent dissociated aspects of universal consciousness, experiencing itself through multiple dimensional perspectives simultaneously. Kastrup's work suggests that parallel realities represent different experiential streams within universal consciousness, with individual awareness capable of shifting between alternative dimensional perspectives through expanded identification with larger consciousness systems. Multidimensional navigation becomes a process of expanding identity beyond individual limitations. The research into multidimensional consciousness reveals that human awareness naturally spans multiple reality dimensions, but typically remains focused within narrow bandwidth limitations that create the illusion of singular timeline existence. Developing multidimensional consciousness involves learning to expand awareness bandwidth to access information and experiences from parallel dimensional streams, while maintaining functional coherence within primary timeline reality. And this expansion requires understanding the neurological mechanisms that either restrict or enable multidimensional perception. Dr. Eben Alexander's research on near-death experiences provides compelling neurological evidence for consciousness existing independently of brain-based reality processing. During his week-long coma from bacterial meningitis, Alexander's neocortex showed no measurable activity, yet he experienced hyper-lucid consciousness states that included detailed interactions with beings from alternative dimensional realities and access to information about multiple timeline possibilities. Alexander's experience revealed consciousness operating through neurological pathways that neuroscience hasn't identified, accessing multidimensional information that couldn't originate from his inactive brain tissue. The detailed accuracy of information he received about alternative reality systems suggests genuine multidimensional consciousness access rather than hallucination or brain-generated fantasy. His research indicates that the brain might function more as a consciousness filtering and focusing mechanism rather than a consciousness generator, limiting awareness to single timeline perception for evolutionary survival advantages, while consciousness itself naturally spans multiple dimensional realities. When brain filtering mechanisms are suspended, full multidimensional awareness becomes accessible. Alexander's work demonstrates that expanded consciousness states can provide direct experiential access to what he describes as multidimensional reality systems, where different physical laws operate and alternative timeline possibilities can be directly perceived and explored through consciousness navigation techniques. Dr. Rick Strassman's research on DMT and consciousness reveals specific neurochemical pathways that appear to enable multidimensional perception by temporarily dissolving the neurological barriers that normally restrict consciousness to single timeline awareness. DMT naturally occurs in human brain tissue and appears to function as a portal compound for accessing parallel reality dimensions. Strassman's clinical research with DMT administration documents thousands of cases where subjects report detailed interactions with beings from alternative realities, access to information about parallel timeline variations of their lives, and direct perception of multidimensional reality structures that exist beyond normal space-time constraints. The DMT experiences show remarkable consistency across subjects, with reports of similar multidimensional beings, alternative reality physics, and parallel timeline navigation that suggest genuine access to objective multidimensional realities rather than subjective hallucinations or brain chemistry artifacts. Strassman's research reveals that DMT appears to activate dormant neurological pathways that normally remain inactive due to evolutionary programming that restricts consciousness to single reality focus for survival efficiency. The compound temporarily overrides these restrictions, allowing consciousness to access its natural multidimensional scope. The neurochemical research indicates that human brains contain built-in mechanisms for multidimensional consciousness access that remain largely unused under normal circumstances, but can be activated through specific altered state techniques, neurochemical interventions, or consciousness practices that bypass normal neurological filtering systems. Dr. Stanislav Grof's research on consciousness exploration through non-ordinary states reveals consistent patterns of multidimensional access across diverse altered state methodologies. Grof's subjects report experiences that include accessing memories from alternative timeline versions of their lives, communication with parallel universe versions of deceased relatives, and direct perception of reality systems operating under different physical laws. Grof's research spans over 50 years and includes documentation of thousands of expanded consciousness experiences that consistently include multidimensional elements. The patterns suggest that human consciousness naturally has access to multidimensional reality, but this access is normally suppressed by ordinary state neurological functioning. The transpersonal psychology research reveals that expanded consciousness states reliably produce what Grof terms transpersonal experiences that transcend individual identity and timeline limitations to access information and experiences from parallel reality dimensions, where alternative versions of existence unfold according to different possibility patterns. Grof's work indicates that multidimensional consciousness access involves temporary suspension of ego boundary maintenance systems that normally restrict awareness to individual identity within singular timeline. When these boundaries dissolve, consciousness can explore alternative dimensional realities where different versions of personal identity exist. Dr. Michael Persinger's research on temporal lobe stimulation demonstrates that specific electromagnetic field applications to brain regions associated with self-identity and temporal perception can trigger experiences consistent with multidimensional consciousness access, including alternative timeline memories and parallel reality perceptions. Persinger's God Helmet experiments reveal that electromagnetic stimulation of temporal lobe regions produces experiences where subjects report sensing invisible presences, accessing alternative timeline memories, and perceiving reality from perspectives that transcend normal temporal boundaries. These experiences suggest that multidimensional consciousness access involves specific neurological processes that can be artificially triggered. The electromagnetic research indicates that temporal lobe regions function as interface points between normal consciousness and multidimensional awareness. When these brain regions are stimulated with specific electromagnetic frequencies, the normal filtering mechanisms that restrict consciousness to single timeline perception are temporarily bypassed. Persinger's work suggests that developing natural multidimensional consciousness access might involve learning to consciously control the neurological processes that his electromagnetic stimulation artificially triggers, enabling voluntary access to alternative timeline information and parallel reality perception. Dr. Melvin Morse's research on childhood near-death experiences reveals that young children often report multidimensional consciousness experiences with greater clarity and detail than adults. suggesting that multidimensional awareness represents a natural consciousness capability that gets progressively filtered or suppressed through normal brain development and social conditioning. Morse's research documents cases where children accurately describe events occurring in parallel timeline realities, report detailed conversations with alternative universe versions of family members, and demonstrate knowledge about multidimensional reality systems that they couldn't have acquired through normal experience or education. The childhood consciousness research indicates that multidimensional awareness might represent the default state of human consciousness, with single timeline focus developing as a learned limitation imposed through brain maturation processes and social conditioning that teaches identification with individual identity within singular reality streams. Children's natural multidimensional consciousness abilities appear to diminish as brain development progresses and social education emphasizes singular reality identification. This suggests that recovering multidimensional consciousness access might involve reactivating natural capabilities that exist but become suppressed through conventional development. Dr. Bruce Greyson's research on consciousness survival reveals that individuals who experience clinical death often report encountering alternative versions of their deceased relatives who describe different life outcomes that occurred in parallel timeline realities. These encounters suggest that consciousness continues to exist across multiple dimensions, even after biological death. Greyson's research indicates that death experiences often include what subjects describe as life reviews that encompass not just their current timeline existence, but alternative timeline variations where different choices led to different outcomes. This multidimensional life review suggests consciousness naturally spans multiple timeline realities. The consciousness survival research reveals that multidimensional awareness might be a fundamental property of consciousness itself, rather than a special capability that requires development. Death experiences suggest that consciousness normally exists across multiple dimensions, but becomes focused on single timelines only during biological existence. Dr. Pim van Lommel's research on near-death consciousness reveals neurological patterns during clinical death that are inconsistent with brain-generated experience, but compatible with consciousness accessing information from non-local sources, including parallel timeline realities and alternative dimensional systems. Van Lommel's research shows that during clinical death, when brain activity ceases, consciousness not only continues, but often expands to access what subjects describe as simultaneous awareness of multiple reality dimensions, communication with beings from alternative universe systems, and detailed knowledge about parallel timeline variations of their existence. The clinical death research provides objective evidence that consciousness operates independently of brain activity and naturally spans multiple dimensional realities. When normal neurological restrictions are removed through death, consciousness reveals its multidimensional nature through expanded awareness that encompasses alternative reality systems. Dr. Kenneth Ring's research on consciousness transformation following near-death experiences reveals that individuals often return with enhanced psychic abilities, expanded creative capabilities, and spontaneous access to alternative timeline information that suggests permanent expansion of multidimensional consciousness access. Ring's longitudinal studies show that near-death experiencers develop ongoing abilities to access information from parallel reality dimensions, including accurate knowledge about alternative timeline events and detailed awareness of multidimensional reality systems that continue to inform their post-experience lives. The consciousness transformation research indicates that multidimensional awareness, once activated through expanded state experiences, can become a permanent expansion of consciousness capabilities rather than temporary access that disappears when normal brain functioning resumes. Dr. Raymond Moody's research on shared death experiences documents cases where groups of individuals simultaneously access multidimensional consciousness states, often perceiving identical alternative reality scenarios and receiving consistent information about parallel timeline possibilities that they couldn't have coordinated through normal communication. Moody's research reveals that multidimensional consciousness access can be contagious, with expanded awareness states spreading between individuals who share strong emotional bonds. These shared multidimensional experiences provide evidence for collective consciousness access to parallel reality dimensions. The shared experience research suggests that multidimensional consciousness operates through field effects that can synchronize between individuals, creating group access to alternative timeline information and parallel reality perception that transcends individual neurological limitations. But the most significant discovery is that specific consciousness practices and techniques can reliably trigger multidimensional awareness states without requiring extreme circumstances like clinical death or psychedelic substances. Advanced meditation practices, lucid dreaming techniques, and consciousness-focusing exercises can enable voluntary access to parallel timeline information and alternative reality exploration, suggesting that multidimensional consciousness represents a natural human capability that can be systematically developed through appropriate training protocols that work by modifying the neurological filtering mechanisms that normally restrict consciousness to single timeline perception. Dr. Stuart Hameroff's research on quantum consciousness transitions reveals that multidimensional awareness operates through quantum coherence effects in neural microtubules that can achieve superposition states spanning multiple timeline possibilities simultaneously. When consciousness achieves sufficient quantum coherence, it can exist in superposition across parallel dimensional states, accessing information and experiences from alternative timeline branches. Hameroff's quantum consciousness model demonstrates that neural microtubules can maintain quantum entanglement relationships with their parallel universe counterparts, creating quantum information channels that allow consciousness to communicate with alternative dimensional versions of itself. These quantum entanglement bridges enable direct access to knowledge, memories, and experiences from parallel timeline realities. The quantum consciousness research reveals that multidimensional transitions occur through quantum measurement processes where consciousness selects specific timeline branches to collapse into experienced reality while maintaining quantum coherence. Links with alternative dimensional possibilities. This process allows conscious navigation between parallel realities through quantum choice mechanisms. Hameroff's work indicates that developing multidimensional consciousness access involves learning to maintain quantum coherence in neural systems while consciously directing quantum measurement processes toward desired timeline destinations. Advanced practitioners can potentially achieve conscious control over quantum reality selection mechanisms. Dr. Henry Stapp's research on consciousness-driven reality selection demonstrates that conscious observation doesn't just collapse quantum wave functions into single outcomes, but can selectively choose which quantum possibilities to collapse from the full spectrum of alternative dimensional potentials available at each quantum measurement moment. Stapp's interpretation of quantum mechanics reveals that consciousness functions as an active agent in reality creation through quantum choice processes that determine which parallel universe branch becomes experienced reality. Every conscious decision represents a quantum measurement that selects one timeline possibility while relegating alternatives to parallel dimensional status. The quantum measurement research shows that consciousness can influence which parallel reality becomes manifest experience through focused intention and coherent observation. By learning to consciously direct quantum measurement processes, individuals can navigate between alternative timeline possibilities and select optimal reality trajectories. Stapp's work suggests that what most people experience as fixed reality represents unconscious quantum choices made through automatic measurement processes. Developing conscious control over quantum measurement allows deliberate navigation between parallel dimensional possibilities and selective manifestation of desired timeline experiences. Dr. Fred Alan Wolf's research on quantum jumping provides practical frameworks for understanding how consciousness can transition between parallel reality dimensions through quantum mechanical processes that operate outside normal space-time constraints. Wolf's quantum jumping model describes specific techniques for achieving conscious transitions between alternative timeline realities. Wolf's research reveals that quantum jumping involves achieving altered consciousness states where normal space-time identification dissolves, allowing consciousness to explore parallel dimensional spaces and select alternative timeline destinations for manifestation into experienced reality through quantum measurement processes. The quantum jumping techniques include visualization exercises that enable consciousness to perceive alternative timeline possibilities, meditation practices that dissolve space-time boundaries, and intention-setting protocols that direct quantum measurement toward specific parallel reality destinations. These methods provide systematic approaches to multidimensional navigation. Wolf's work demonstrates that quantum jumping doesn't violate physical laws, but operates through quantum mechanical principles that allow consciousness to access parallel universe branches that exist simultaneously with current reality. Quantum jumping represents navigation between existing parallel possibilities rather than creation of new realities. Dr. Amit Goswami's research on consciousness-mediated reality shifts reveals that multidimensional transitions occur through quantum leap processes, where consciousness discontinuously jumps between alternative reality states rather than gradually transitioning through intermediate possibilities. These quantum leaps enable instantaneous access to dramatically different timeline possibilities. Goswami's quantum consciousness model shows that multidimensional navigation operates through what he terms quantum creativity, where consciousness accesses novel possibilities that exist in quantum potential fields, extending across multiple dimensional layers. These quantum creative processes enable discovery of timeline alternatives that weren't previously accessible to normal awareness. The consciousness-mediated reality shift research indicates that quantum leaps between dimensions can produce dramatic changes in personal circumstances, relationships, abilities, and even physical reality conditions through consciousness accessing alternative timeline branches where different possibility patterns have manifested. Goswami's work suggests that developing multidimensional consciousness involves learning to think and perceive in quantum rather than classical terms, embracing discontinuous possibility rather than linear causation, and recognizing consciousness as the fundamental creative agent that determines which dimensional possibilities become manifest reality. Dr. Deepak Chopra's research on consciousness and quantum field interactions reveals that multidimensional awareness operates through what he describes as field effects, where consciousness interfaces with quantum information. Fields that contain all possible timeline variations and alternative dimensional realities. Chopra's research demonstrates that consciousness can access quantum information fields through meditation practices that achieve resonance with specific dimensional frequencies. Different meditation techniques appear to provide access to different dimensional layers, with advanced practices enabling navigation across multiple parallel reality levels. The quantum field consciousness research reveals that multidimensional navigation involves learning to recognize and interact with the subtle energy signatures that distinguish different dimensional realities. Each parallel timeline possesses unique vibrational characteristics that consciousness can learn to identify and select for transitional focus. Chopra's work indicates that quantum field interactions enable consciousness to not only access information from alternative dimensions, but actively participate in selecting which timeline possibilities manifest as experienced reality through resonant field effects that influence quantum probability distributions. Dr. Lynn McTaggart's research on intention effects reveals that focused human consciousness can influence quantum systems across space and time through non-local field interactions that operate independently of dimensional boundaries. These intention effects suggest that consciousness naturally operates multidimensionally, even when focused primarily on single timeline reality. McTaggart's intention experiments demonstrate that consciousness can influence target systems that exist in alternative dimensional locations, suggesting that intention operates through multidimensional channels that transcend normal space-time limitations. Successful intention work appears to involve accessing quantum field networks that span multiple reality dimensions. The intention research reveals that consciousness effects become stronger when practitioners achieve expanded awareness states that encompass multidimensional perspectives rather than focusing exclusively on single timeline outcomes. Multidimensional intention appears to operate through quantum field amplification effects. McTaggart's work suggests that developing multidimensional consciousness enhances intention capabilities by providing access to quantum field networks that span multiple dimensional layers, enabling consciousness to influence reality through parallel processing across multiple timeline possibilities simultaneously. Dr. Dean Radin's research on retrocausal effects demonstrates that consciousness can influence past events through quantum field interactions that operate outside normal temporal constraints. These temporal influence effects suggest that consciousness naturally spans multiple timeline dimensions and can navigate between past, present, and future possibility states. Radin's experiments show that present consciousness states can influence random event generators that operated in the past, suggesting that multidimensional consciousness exists outside linear time constraints and can access past dimensional states for retroactive influence through quantum field mechanisms. The retrocausal research indicates that multidimensional consciousness can potentially alter past timeline conditions through present moment awareness practices, creating feedback loops between different temporal dimensional states that allow conscious optimization of entire timeline sequences. Radin's work reveals that consciousness operates through quantum field networks that connect all temporal states within multidimensional reality, enabling navigation between past, present, and future dimensional layers through expanded awareness techniques that transcend linear time identification. Dr. William Tiller's research on consciousness-matter interaction reveals that focused human awareness can create persistent changes in the quantum field properties of physical space that enable enhanced consciousness. Reality interactions across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Tiller's experiments demonstrate that consciousness can condition physical spaces for multidimensional awareness by creating quantum field modifications that persist long after the original consciousness influence is withdrawn. These conditioned spaces appear to facilitate easier access to alternative dimensional realities. The consciousness matter research shows that multidimensional navigation can be enhanced by working in spaces that have been prepared through sustained consciousness practices that modify local quantum field properties to support expanded dimensional awareness and alternative reality access. Tiller's work indicates that physical locations can serve as dimensional gateways where quantum field modifications enable enhanced multidimensional consciousness access, suggesting that geographical factors may influence the ease of navigating between parallel reality dimensions. Dr. Gary Schwartz's research on consciousness survival reveals that multidimensional awareness continues after biological death, with deceased individuals apparently able to communicate information from alternative dimensional perspectives that include knowledge about parallel timeline possibilities that were never experienced during biological existence. Schwartz's mediumship research documents cases where deceased individuals provide accurate information about alternative timeline events and parallel reality possibilities that suggest continued consciousness existence across multiple dimensional layers after physical death occurs. The consciousness survival research indicates that biological death represents transition to expanded multidimensional awareness rather than consciousness termination, with deceased consciousness gaining access to parallel timeline information that was restricted during biological existence through normal neurological filtering mechanisms. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery is that individual multidimensional consciousness transitions can trigger sympathetic resonance effects that influence entire groups and communities, suggesting that dimensional navigation operates through collective field effects that can create mass transitions between parallel reality timelines, where entire populations shift simultaneously to alternative dimensional destinations through coordinated consciousness processes that transcend individual navigation capabilities. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's research on morphic fields reveals that consciousness creates information templates that transcend individual awareness and can influence groups across space and time through morphic resonance effects that operate independently of normal communication channels. When individuals achieve multidimensional consciousness transitions, they create morphic field patterns that can trigger similar transitions in others through resonant field effects. Sheldrake's morphic field research demonstrates that multidimensional awareness transitions create persistent information patterns in morphic fields that make similar transitions easier for subsequent individuals to achieve. Once someone successfully navigates to alternative dimensional realities, they establish morphic pathways that others can follow through field resonance mechanisms. The morphic field effects appear to operate across dimensional boundaries, with successful multidimensional transitions in one timeline, creating resonant patterns that influence parallel reality possibilities throughout the morphic field network. This suggests that individual dimensional navigation contributes to collective multidimensional evolution across multiple timeline branches. Sheldrake's research indicates that collective multidimensional consciousness evolution occurs through morphic field accumulation, where increasing numbers of successful dimensional navigators create stronger morphic resonance patterns that facilitate mass consciousness transitions between parallel reality timelines. Dr. Lynn McTaggart's collective intention experiments reveal that groups focusing coherent intention can create reality changes that affect not just target systems, but entire probability fields surrounding those systems, suggesting that collective consciousness can influence dimensional transition possibilities for entire populations through coordinated intention effects. McTaggart's global intention experiments demonstrate that when thousands of participants simultaneously focus intention on specific outcomes, the effects extend far beyond the immediate targets to influence social, environmental, and even geological systems that appear to involve shifts between alternative timeline possibilities where different collective outcomes manifest. The collective intention research shows that groups achieving consciousness coherence can create what McTaggart terms field effects that influence the probability distributions governing reality manifestation for entire communities and regions, potentially causing collective transitions between parallel dimensional timelines. McTaggart's work reveals that collective consciousness effects are amplified when participants not only share common intentions, but achieve synchronized altered states that appear to enable group access to multidimensional field networks that span multiple parallel reality layers simultaneously. Dr. Dean Radin's research on global consciousness effects demonstrates that collective human attention during major global events creates measurable changes in quantum random systems worldwide, suggesting that mass consciousness focus can influence dimensional probability fields on planetary scales through collective multidimensional field interactions. Radin's Global Consciousness Project data shows that during events that capture worldwide attention, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, major celebrations, quantum random generators throughout the world begin showing non-random patterns that correlate with the intensity and coherence of collective emotional responses to these events. The global consciousness research indicates that collective human awareness can create quantum field effects that transcend normal space-time boundaries and appear to influence probability distributions across multiple dimensional layers, potentially causing subtle collective shifts between parallel timeline possibilities. Radin's work suggests that major global events might serve as dimensional transition catalysts that enable collective consciousness to navigate between alternative timeline possibilities through mass quantum coherence effects generated by synchronized global attention and emotional response patterns. Dr. Roger Nelson's extended research on global consciousness correlations reveals that collective awareness effects strengthen during periods of genuine emotional unity across cultural and geographical boundaries, suggesting that authentic collective consciousness coherence is required for significant multidimensional transition effects. Nelson's research shows that artificial or superficial mass attention events produce weaker consciousness effects than genuine collective emotional responses to significant events, indicating that multidimensional navigation requires authentic consciousness coherence rather than mechanical synchronization of attention or intention. The global consciousness correlation research demonstrates that collective multidimensional effects appear strongest when global events evoke universal human emotions that transcend cultural differences and create genuine species-wide consciousness coherence that can access dimensional field networks spanning multiple reality layers. Dr. William Cox's statistical research on collective precognitive behavior reveals patterns suggesting that entire populations unconsciously respond to future dimensional possibilities through behavioral changes that occur before significant timeline transition. Events become manifest in experienced reality. Cox's research documents statistical anomalies in transportation patterns, economic indicators, and social behaviors that appear to anticipate future events through collective unconscious access to alternative timeline information, where different dimensional possibilities are already manifest. The collective precognitive research indicates that populations naturally possess multidimensional awareness that operates through unconscious behavioral optimization mechanisms that steer collective choices away from negative timeline possibilities and toward positive dimensional destinations. Cox's work suggests that collective multidimensional navigation occurs continuously through unconscious processes, where mass consciousness automatically samples alternative timeline possibilities and influences collective behavior patterns to optimize dimensional trajectory toward beneficial reality outcomes. Dr. Stanislav Grof's research on collective consciousness experiences reveals that groups achieving expanded awareness, states together, often report shared access to alternative dimensional realities where they perceive collective past life experiences, group encounters with multidimensional beings, and shared exploration of parallel timeline possibilities. Groff's group consciousness research demonstrates that collective expanded states can enable simultaneous multidimensional access for entire groups, with participants reporting identical alternative reality experiences that suggest genuine group navigation to shared dimensional destinations rather than individual psychological phenomena. The collective transpersonal research shows that groups can achieve shared multi-dimensional consciousness states that provide access to collective memory fields, alternative timeline information, and parallel reality exploration that transcends individual awareness capabilities and enables group consciousness navigation between dimensional possibilities. Groff's work indicates that collective multidimensional consciousness represents a natural human capability that becomes accessible when groups achieve sufficient consciousness coherence to transcend individual identity limitations and access shared dimensional awareness fields. Dr. Marilyn Schlitz's research on collective healing effects reveals that groups focusing healing intention often report shared alternative reality experiences during healing sessions, including group encounters with multidimensional healing beings and collective access to alternative timeline realities where target individuals exist in perfect health. Schlitz's collective healing research demonstrates that group healing effects appear to operate through multidimensional mechanisms where collective consciousness accesses parallel timeline realities where healing outcomes already exist and draws those dimensional possibilities into manifest experience through group intention focus. The collective healing research indicates that group consciousness can navigate between dimensional healing possibilities to select and manifest optimal health outcomes for target individuals through collective access to alternative timeline realities where different health conditions exist. Dr. Larry Dossey's research on collective prayer effects reveals similar patterns where group prayer appears to access alternative dimensional realities where desired outcomes already exist, drawing those parallel timeline possibilities into manifest experience through collective spiritual focus. Dossey's prayer research shows that collective spiritual practices often involve group access to what participants describe as higher dimensional realities, where divine intervention and miraculous healing represent normal conditions rather than extraordinary exceptions to natural laws. The collective prayer research indicates that group spiritual consciousness can navigate between dimensional layers to access parallel realities where divine assistance and miraculous outcomes operate through different physical laws that enable extraordinary healing and transformation effects. Dr. John Hagelin's research on collective meditation effects demonstrates that groups practicing transcendental meditation can create measurable improvements in social conditions, crime rates, and conflict levels that appear to involve collective navigation to alternative timeline possibilities where more harmonious social conditions exist. Hagelin's research on the Maharishi effect shows that when sufficient numbers of people in a population practice coherent meditation, the entire community shows statistical improvements in social indicators that suggest collective transition to alternative dimensional timelines where different social possibility patterns manifest. The collective meditation research indicates that group consciousness coherence can influence entire population probability fields to shift toward alternative timeline possibilities where social harmony and reduced conflict represent the dominant reality patterns rather than exceptional conditions. Hagelin's work suggests that collective consciousness evolution involves developing enhanced group meditation capabilities that enable conscious navigation toward optimal collective dimensional destinations through coordinated consciousness practices that influence mass reality, probability distributions. Dr. Masaru Emoto's research on collective consciousness effects on water reveals that group intention can influence water crystal formation patterns on massive scales, with collective consciousness events affecting water supplies and environmental water systems across large geographical regions through apparent dimensional resonance effects. Emoto's research shows that collective intention events can create beneficial changes in water quality and ecosystem health that appear to involve accessing alternative dimensional possibilities where environmental conditions exist in optimal states, then drawing those parallel reality conditions into manifest experience. The collective environmental research indicates that group consciousness can potentially address ecological problems through multidimensional navigation that accesses alternative timeline realities where environmental damage hasn't occurred or has been successfully remediated through different historical development patterns. Dr. Ervin Laszlo's research on collective consciousness evolution suggests that humanity is approaching a phase transition where collective multidimensional consciousness capabilities will enable conscious species-wide navigation between alternative civilization possibilities through coordinated global consciousness practices that access cosmic dimensional networks. Laszlo's work indicates that collective consciousness evolution involves developing enhanced access to what he terms the Akashic Field, a cosmic information network that contains the developmental possibilities for entire civilizations across multiple dimensional layers and parallel timeline variations. The collective consciousness evolution research suggests that developing species-wide multidimensional navigation capabilities could enable humanity to consciously select optimal civilizational trajectory possibilities from available dimensional alternatives rather than allowing civilization development to occur through unconscious historical processes. But the ultimate implications of collective multidimensional consciousness involve the possibility that entire civilizations could develop coordinated dimensional navigation capabilities that enable conscious participation in cosmic evolution processes, where species-wide consciousness learns to optimize not just individual or collective outcomes, but contributes to universal consciousness development through deliberate selection of dimensional possibilities that serve cosmic evolution across multiple reality layers simultaneously. And this cosmic participation requires understanding practical techniques for developing both individual and collective multidimensional consciousness mastery that can be systematically cultivated through specific training protocols. Dr. Joe Dispenza's research on dimensional shifting techniques reveals specific practices that individuals can use to develop conscious control over reality timeline navigation through what he describes as becoming nobody, no one, nowhere, no thing. A consciousness state that transcends dimensional boundaries and enables access to infinite parallel reality possibilities. Dispenza's dimensional shifting protocols involve meditation techniques that dissolve normal space-time identification by systematically releasing attachment to specific dimensional coordinates, including personal identity, temporal location, spatial position, and material form identification. This dissolution creates expanded consciousness states that can navigate freely across dimensional boundaries. The practical dimensional shifting training includes visualization exercises where practitioners learn to perceive their existence from perspectives that transcend current timeline limitations. Imagination practices that explore alternative reality possibilities, and intention-setting techniques that direct consciousness toward specific dimensional destinations. Dispenza's research demonstrates that regular practice of dimensional shifting meditation creates measurable changes in brain structure and function that appear to enhance multidimensional consciousness access capabilities. Long-term practitioners show increased neuroplasticity and brain coherence patterns that correlate with enhanced reality navigation abilities. The dimensional shifting research indicates that consciousness can learn to maintain coherent awareness while transitioning between alternative reality states, enabling practitioners to gather information and experiences from parallel dimensions and integrate them into their primary timeline existence. Dr. Deepak Chopra's research on multidimensional meditation reveals specific techniques for developing what he terms cosmic consciousness. Expanded awareness states that encompass multiple dimensional layers simultaneously and enable conscious participation in universal intelligence networks that span infinite parallel realities. Chopra's multidimensional meditation practices involve breathing techniques that synchronize consciousness with cosmic rhythms, mantra practices that align awareness with universal frequencies, and concentration exercises that enable focus across multiple dimensional layers without losing coherent integration. The Cosmic Consciousness Development Training teaches practitioners to recognize the subtle energy signatures that distinguish different dimensional realities, learn to navigate between parallel timeline possibilities through intention direction, and develop the ability to maintain simultaneous awareness across multiple reality layers. Chopra's research shows that advanced multidimensional meditation can enable practitioners to access information from parallel universe versions of themselves, communicate with consciousness entities from alternative dimensional realities, and participate directly in cosmic intelligence processes that coordinate universal evolution. The multidimensional meditation research indicates that cosmic consciousness represents the natural state of awareness when dimensional boundaries are transcended through expanded identification with universal consciousness rather than individual timeline identity. Dr. Bruce Lipton's research on belief-driven reality selection reveals that consciousness can navigate between alternative dimensional realities through changing fundamental beliefs about what is possible, with belief modifications creating quantum field changes that enable transitions to parallel timeline realities where different possibility patterns exist. Lipton's belief transformation techniques involve identifying limiting beliefs that restrict consciousness to specific dimensional realities, developing expanded belief systems that encompass multidimensional possibilities, and practicing new belief patterns until they become integrated at subconscious levels that automatically navigate toward expanded reality options. The belief-driven reality selection research shows that beliefs function as quantum filters that determine which dimensional possibilities consciousness can access and experience. By expanding belief systems to include multidimensional realities, practitioners can access parallel timeline possibilities that were previously blocked by limiting belief patterns. Lipton's work demonstrates that belief changes can create rapid transitions between alternative reality timelines, with new beliefs automatically navigating consciousness toward parallel dimensional realities, where those expanded beliefs represent normal operating conditions rather than extraordinary possibilities. Dr. Greg Braden's research on timeline jumping protocols reveals specific techniques for consciously navigating between alternative reality possibilities through what he describes as choice point navigation, the ability to recognize quantum decision moments and consciously select which timeline possibility to collapse into experienced reality. Braden's timeline jumping techniques involve developing sensitivity to choice point moments when reality branches into multiple possibilities, learning to pause at choice points to evaluate alternative timeline options, and practicing conscious selection of optimal reality trajectories through coherent intention and emotional alignment. The choice point navigation training teaches practitioners to recognize the feeling signatures that indicate when reality is in quantum flux with multiple timeline possibilities available for selection, develop decision-making skills that evaluate multidimensional consequences of different choices, and master emotional coherence techniques that enable clear navigation toward desired dimensional destinations. Braden's research shows that timeline jumping abilities can be systematically developed through practice with daily choice point recognition, meditation on alternative possibility outcomes, and training in coherent intention focus that enables conscious reality selection rather than unconscious default pattern following. The timeline jumping research indicates that reality constantly offers multiple dimensional possibilities at choice point moments, with consciousness development involving learning to recognize and consciously navigate these quantum selection opportunities, rather than allowing unconscious programming to determine dimensional trajectory. Dr. Nassim Haramein's research on consciousness and unified field interactions reveals that multidimensional awareness operates through resonance with universal geometric patterns that exist across all dimensional layers and provide navigation coordinates for consciousness travel between parallel reality possibilities. Haramein's unified field consciousness techniques involve meditation on sacred geometric patterns that appear consistently across dimensional boundaries, visualization practices that align consciousness with universal structural templates, and breathing exercises that synchronize awareness with cosmic geometric rhythms. The unified field navigation research demonstrates that consciousness can use sacred geometric patterns as interdimensional maps that provide stable reference points for navigating between alternative reality layers while maintaining coherent orientation across dimensional transitions. Haramein's work indicates that geometric meditation practices can enable consciousness to access universal intelligence networks that coordinate reality manifestation across multiple dimensional layers and provide guidance for optimal navigation between parallel timeline possibilities. Dr. Stephen Greer's research on consciousness and cosmic intelligence contact reveals that multidimensional awareness development enables direct communication with advanced consciousness entities that exist in parallel dimensional realities and can provide guidance for human consciousness, evolution, and civilization development. Greer's consciousness contact protocols involve meditation techniques that achieve coherent states capable of interdimensional communication, intention practices that signal readiness for contact with advanced consciousness entities, and group consciousness exercises that enable collective contact with multidimensional intelligence networks. The cosmic intelligence contact research shows that consciousness development to multidimensional levels naturally enables communication with advanced entities that exist in parallel reality dimensions and can provide knowledge about consciousness, evolution, advanced technologies, and optimal civilization development paths. Greer's work demonstrates that interdimensional contact represents a natural capability of sufficiently developed consciousness rather than supernatural phenomenon, with contact occurring through resonant field interactions between consciousness entities across dimensional boundaries. Dr. Tom Campbell's research on consciousness simulation theory suggests that multidimensional navigation involves learning to consciously interface with the fundamental information systems that generate reality experiences across multiple dimensional layers through what he describes as consciousness hacking techniques. Campbell's consciousness hacking approaches involve meditation practices that enable direct access to reality generation processes, intention exercises that allow conscious modification of reality parameters, and awareness development that recognizes the information-based nature of dimensional experience. The simulation theory, consciousness research, indicates that multidimensional reality exists as information systems that consciousness can learn to access and modify through appropriate interface techniques, enabling conscious participation in reality creation processes across multiple dimensional layers. Campbell's work suggests that advanced consciousness development involves recognizing reality as information patterns that can be consciously navigated and modified through expanded awareness that understands the fundamental information-based nature of multidimensional existence. Dr. Amit Goswami's research on quantum creativity and consciousness reveals that multidimensional navigation enables access to creative possibilities that exist in quantum potential fields spanning multiple dimensional layers, allowing consciousness to discover solutions and innovations that don't exist in current timeline reality. Goswami's quantum creativity techniques involve meditation practices that access quantum potential fields, intention exercises that explore creative possibilities across dimensional boundaries, and consciousness expansion methods that enable discovery of novel solutions through multidimensional exploration. The quantum creativity research shows that multidimensional consciousness development can dramatically enhance creative capabilities by providing access to innovative possibilities that exist in alternative dimensional realities, where different creative solutions have already been developed and tested. Goswami's work indicates that creativity represents a form of multidimensional consciousness activity, where awareness explores possibility spaces across multiple reality layers to discover optimal solutions that can then be manifested in current timeline experience. But perhaps the most significant development is the emergence of collective, multidimensional consciousness training programs that teach groups to coordinate their dimensional navigation capabilities for collective reality selection and conscious civilization guidance toward optimal developmental trajectories that serve universal consciousness evolution. These collective training protocols involve synchronized meditation practices that enable group consciousness coherence across dimensional boundaries, coordinated intention exercises that allow collective reality selection from available timeline possibilities, and collaborative consciousness development that enables groups to access cosmic intelligence networks for civilization guidance. The collective multidimensional consciousness development represents the next stage of human evolution, where individual consciousness capabilities integrate into species-wide dimensional navigation abilities that enable conscious participation in cosmic evolution, processes through coordinated reality selection that serves universal consciousness development. Advanced collective consciousness training includes techniques for recognizing optimal civilizational trajectory possibilities from available dimensional alternatives, methods for achieving species-wide consciousness coherence that enables collective dimensional navigation, and protocols for accessing cosmic intelligence guidance that supports universal consciousness evolution. The future of human consciousness development lies in mastering both individual and collective multidimensional navigation capabilities that enable conscious participation in cosmic evolution through deliberate selection of reality possibilities that serve universal consciousness expansion across infinite dimensional layers. Every individual who develops multidimensional consciousness abilities contributes to collective human evolution toward conscious species-wide reality navigation that could transform civilization into an active agent of cosmic consciousness development rather than an unconscious participant in universal evolution. Your consciousness naturally exists across multiple dimensions right now, accessing information and possibilities from parallel realities while maintaining primary focus on current timeline experience. The question is whether you'll develop conscious awareness of your multidimensional nature and learn to navigate deliberately between alternative reality possibilities. What parallel realities will you choose to explore? What alternative timeline possibilities will you access to enhance your current existence? How will you develop your natural multidimensional consciousness capabilities to contribute to collective human evolution toward cosmic consciousness participation? The infinite dimensional matrix of consciousness contains every possible reality variation and timeline possibility, waiting for your conscious navigation and exploration. Your multidimensional consciousness development becomes service to universal evolution through expansion of awareness beyond timeline limitations toward cosmic consciousness, participation in infinite reality creation. The cosmos of infinite dimensional possibilities surrounds your awareness at every moment, containing alternative realities where every conceivable possibility exists as manifest experience. Your journey involves learning to recognize, access, and consciously navigate these infinite dimensional treasures that represent your true nature as multidimensional consciousness, participating in universal creation across eternal expanses of infinite possibility and becoming.